whatever, just give me stuff to sing. So we did a lot of that, and then when he'd gone, I mean, he was very...
I never had the opportunity before to create something on this scale.
Brian May is one of the most respected and soft-spoken legends in rock. As Queen's lead guitarist, he's known for his skill, kindness, and love for real music, not for starting fights. But don't be fooled. Behind the calm voice is a sharp mind, and when something crosses the line, he doesn't hold back. Today, we reveal the 6 bands that Brian May hated with a passion. 1. Sex Pistols.
I know what I think, and that's all that counts to me. I don't try and impress anybody but myself.
It all began with a torrent of curse words on live television. In late 1976, Great Britain was a dreary, gray, and discontented place. The national economy was sputtering, workers were frequently on strike, and a general feeling of bleak hopelessness hung heavy in the air. In the midst of this gloom, Queen stood as a beacon of vibrant technicolor fantasy and aspirational success. Their complex, beautiful, and wildly ambitious song, Bohemian Rhapsody, had been a monumental #1 hit. They represented meticulous craftsmanship, musical ambition, and glorious escape. At that very same moment, a new, raw, and angry sound was clawing its way out of London's grimmiest, stickiest clubs. This sound belonged to the Sex Pistols. They weren't just a new band, they were a sneering, spitting, and visceral rejection of everything Queen stood for, and Brian May despised them for it. The simmering conflict between these two opposing worlds finally exploded on December 1st, 1976. Queen was booked for a high-profile appearance on a popular London TV show called Today. However, in a rare moment of human vulnerability for the seemingly invincible superstar, Freddie Mercury developed a severe, agonizing toothache and needed an emergency dental visit, forcing the band to cancel at the last minute. The show scrambled for a replacement, and the band they booked was the Sex Pistols. The host, a cynical journalist named Bill Grundy, seemed to actively goad the band members, practically daring them to say something shocking on live television. They eagerly obliged. Frontman Johnny Rotten and guitarist Steve Jones filled the tea time air with a stream of 4-letter words, creating a massive national scandal overnight. The next day, newspapers like the Daily Mirror ran outraged. Banner headlines, "The Filth and the Fury." For most people, it was a shocking but fleeting media moment. For Brian May, it was a declaration of war on his entire world. May's profound hatred wasn't born of simple professional jealousy over a rival band's attention. It was a fundamental clash of two opposing philosophies. He and Queen believed in pushing the art of music as far as it could possibly go, treating the recording studio like a sophisticated laboratory for sound. They would labor for weeks, sometimes months, to record hundreds of individual vocal and guitar layers, painstakingly creating a rich, symphonic sound that had never been heard before. They proudly stamped "no synths" on their early album covers to make it clear to the world that their incredibly complex sounds were all created by human hands and real instruments. Brian May, the student of physics, had even designed and built his own unique guitar, the legendary Red Special, in a quest to achieve the perfect, unique tone. But his anger at punk's noise was nothing compared to the fury he felt when another famous band disrespected Freddie Mercury's memory right to his face. Brian hated punk's philosophy, but his fury for one band became deeply personal. If you love these rare stories, subscribe for what comes next. 2. Guns N' Roses.
It's the only people I could play with to start a band with that I like.
Same here. We went through so many different people, and this ended up being the people that we most believed in. We're like a family. We believe in each other.
The Freddie Mercury tribute concert for AIDS awareness in April 1992 was designed to be a beautiful, powerful, and global farewell to a true icon. Held at London's legendary Wembley Stadium, it was broadcast to an estimated audience of over 1 billion people in more than 70 countries. It featured a staggering lineup of the biggest stars in music, from Elton John and George Michael to David Bowie and Liza Minnelli, all gathered to honor their friend and raise awareness for a devastating cause. For Brian May, it was one of the most important, emotional, and logistically complex nights of his entire life. But behind the public curtain of unity and celebration, the deeply unprofessional behavior of one band, and specifically its notoriously difficult frontman, turned a key part of this sacred tribute into a stressful, unprofessional nightmare. That band was Guns N' Roses, and their singer, Axl Rose, earned a permanent, unforgivable spot on Brian May's blacklist through his shocking display of disrespect.
We've never had to, we've always gone on like at 11 o'clock or midnight, and that's where we come from. So as an opening band, you had to cater to the headlining band and go on their schedule.
The grand finale of the entire concert was meticulously planned to be a historic, show-stopping moment. The plan was for Guns N' Roses, then the biggest rock band in the world, to perform their own powerful set. Then their singer, Axl Rose, was scheduled to join the 3 surviving members of Queen and the legendary Elton John on stage for a stunning, once-in-a-lifetime performance of Bohemian Rhapsody. It was set to be the ultimate tribute, a passing of the torch from one generation's rock gods to another. But as the day of the globally televised concert drew near, Axl Rose was a ghost. He completely, inexplicably skipped the scheduled rehearsals. The band, including Brian May, Roger Taylor, and a patiently waiting Sir Elton John, were left utterly stranded. They had absolutely no idea if Axl, a man famous for his unpredictability, would even bother to show up on the night of the show. May later spoke about the incredible, almost unbearable stress of the situation, trying to hold together a massive global broadcast while its star guest was completely missing in action. They were forced to rehearse the incredibly complex, multi-part song without him, with a visibly frustrated Elton John trying to figure out how on earth they were going to handle the intricate duet live on stage in front of 1 billion people. It was a slap in the face, not only to Queen, but to all the other world-class artists, like the consummately professional David Bowie, who had shown up on time, meticulously prepared, and ready to pour their hearts into honoring Freddie. When Axl finally did deign to appear at Wembley on the day of the concert, just before he was due on stage, his nonchalant, casual attitude was almost worse than his absence. The scandal wasn't just his lateness, it was his complete lack of engagement with the profound emotional weight of the event. May recalled that Axl seemed to be in his own private world, treating this sacred tribute like it was just another gig on the tour. While dealing with one arrogant frontman was a nightmare, May would soon face off against an entire band whose attitude felt like a personal insult. Third, Oasis.
I was listening to, actually, the other day I was around the house. I haven't listened to Definitely Maybe for ages, maybe about, I don't know, maybe about a year and a half, maybe 2 years. The last time I put the record and listened to it all the way through.
Few bands in history have ever crashed onto the world stage with as much swagger, sneering confidence, and outright arrogance as Oasis. In the mid-1990s, Britain was in the grip of Cool Britannia, a vibrant cultural movement that celebrated all things British, and the Manchester band Oasis were its loud, abrasive, and unofficial kings. This new wave of guitar-based music was dubbed Britpop, and Oasis aggressively positioned themselves as the saviors of real rock and roll. Unfortunately for them, their definition of real rock often involved casually insulting the legendary bands that had come before them. For Brian May, the boorish, headline-grabbing antics of brothers Noel and Liam Gallagher were irritating enough. But when they directed their dismissive and ignorant comments toward Queen, and most unforgivably toward Freddie Mercury, it ignited a deep and lasting resentment in the otherwise gentle guitarist.
Noel was playing guitar since he was 11. I was doing nothing, telling him to shut up playing it, because I had my own work to do.
The most famous and galling insult came directly from the mouth of Noel Gallagher, the band's chief songwriter and resident loudmouth. In one of his many famously unfiltered interviews, he was asked for his opinion on Queen. He delivered a classic backhanded compliment, one laced with a particularly nasty poison. He begrudgingly acknowledged that Freddie Mercury was a great frontman, a fact so self-evident it's impossible to deny, but then immediately twisted the knife. With a casual, dismissive shrug, he added, "But I'm not a fan of the music." To an average person, this might seem like a simple, harmless statement of personal taste. But to Brian May, A man who had co-written, arranged, and meticulously crafted that very music with his dearest friends, it was a profoundly arrogant, ignorant, and deeply offensive blow.
Ginger.
What are you talking about?
Here was a musician whose own band was built almost entirely on a foundation of loud, simple, and often directly recycled riffs from the Beatles, passing judgment on the symphonic, multi-layered, genre-defying masterpiece that was Queen's musical catalog. It was the ultimate disrespect from a musical lightweight posing as a heavyweight champion. May's hatred was born from this fundamental clash of artistic philosophy and work ethic. Queen was about maximum effort, boundless creativity, and relentless innovation.
The problem is, it does me head in sometimes. I don't mind the Stone Roses as much, but it gets a bit boring after a bit because we're Oasis.
Their production was famously complex. They would layer hundreds of individual tracks to create their rich, orchestral sound, often laboring for months on a single song. Oasis, on the other hand, worked with their producer Owen Morris to perfect a brute force, wall of sound technique where every instrument was compressed and pushed into the red on the mixing board to be as loud as physically possible. It was an effective sound, but it was a blunt instrument compared to Queen's delicate and sophisticated sonic architecture. May was angered by those who dismissed his music, but he was saddened by a new movement that seemed to dismiss joy itself. 4. Nirvana.
Sound and see if we can get away with it, because we love that kind of music. We like a lot of commercial music.
Not all of Brian May's musical dislikes were born from anger or personal insult. Some of the deepest ones came from a place of profound sadness and a feeling that rock and roll was losing its way. This was the complex nature of his feelings towards Nirvana. There was no direct feud or public scandal. In fact, May often expressed sympathy and respect for their frontman, Kurt Cobain, as a brilliant songwriter and a deeply troubled person. However, he held a deep, passionate aversion to the grunge movement that Nirvana led. He saw it as a dark, depressing shadow that fell over the entire musical landscape of the early 1990s, extinguishing the joy, skill, and theatricality of the rock music he loved. He didn't hate the band so much as he hated what they had done to the spirit of rock. Before Nirvana, the rock scene was dominated by hair metal bands like Mötley Crüe and Poison. They were all about big hair, flashy clothes, and celebrating a decadent, party-all-the-time lifestyle.
Maybe you shouldn't be talking about it. It's like taboo, Daddy's bonking a little stepchild. We don't talk about that here.
Their music was often slick and polished. Grunge was a violent reaction against all of that. It was raw, angry, and dressed down in ripped jeans and flannel shirts. For May, the biggest casualty in this shift was the guitar hero. For decades, the guitar solo was the glorious centerpiece of a rock song, a moment of soaring melodic expression and technical brilliance. May himself was a master of the form, crafting solos that were like mini operas. Then came grunge, with its anti-solo philosophy. Flashy, expert playing was suddenly seen as uncool and pretentious. Kurt Cobain's solos were often jagged, screaming bursts of feedback, a deliberate rejection of the craft May had spent his life perfecting. He found this new direction profoundly disheartening.
As soon as we started, the first song that we recorded, we listened back to it and said, okay, yeah, that's his sound, that's what we wanted, which isn't.
He felt a whole generation was being taught that aspiring to technical excellence was somehow fake. The real scandal for May was this philosophical change. He saw grunge as an overwhelmingly depressive force. Queen's music, even its most tragic songs, was about transcendence and empowerment, designed to lift people up. It was about fantasy and creating a world more exciting than your own. Nirvana's music, by contrast, seemed to wallow in pain and alienation. The famous lyric, "Here we are now, entertain us," sounded to May like a sarcastic, joyless demand.
We don't want to over-practice the new songs. Actually, it's a good idea to play new songs, to see what the vibe is like live, but...
He believed rock and roll should be a source of power and escape, not a soundtrack for misery. He hated that the raw, often bleak reality of grunge had replaced the fantasy, theatricality, and sheer, unadulterated fun that he believed was rock's main purpose. He wasn't angry at Nirvana. He was heartbroken by the dark, colorless world their music had helped create. He disliked grunge for its sadness, but he held a special contempt for a new kind of punk rock that tried to be as grand as Queen, but in his view, failed. Brian was saddened by grunge's joyless sound, but his contempt for another band was surgical. To hear his most cutting critique, make sure you're subscribed. 5. Green Day.
You know, do I believe the 50-year-old man that's gonna say smash?
In the mid-2000s, a punk rock band from California named Green Day did something incredibly ambitious and became one of the biggest bands on the planet. They released an album called American Idiot. It wasn't just a collection of songs, it was a full-blown rock opera, telling a story from beginning to end, in the tradition of epic albums like The Who's Tommy. Given Queen's own love for grand theatrical concepts, one might assume Brian May would admire their ambition. Instead, he held a complicated and deeply critical view of their work.
Live off our music and stuff. We just, most of the time we lived in the van, you know, we toured 6 months out of the year all the time. And
he saw their attempt at a rock opera as a pale imitation of the real thing, an effort that, for all its power, was missing the most important ingredient of all, good tunes. Brian May actually went to see the stage musical based on American Idiot and later gave a public comment that was a masterclass in polite insults. He called the show a masterpiece of its kind, praising its incredible, relentless energy.
We wanted our band to evolve naturally, and we knew somewhere in the back of our minds, you know, in like 1993, 1994.
But then he delivered the devastating punchline. He said that while the show certainly had energy, it did not have a lot of tunes. For a master of melody like Brian May, a man who wrote songs like Killer Queen, with its intricate vocal harmonies and tricky piano parts, this was the most damning criticism possible. He was saying their music was loud, fast, and exciting, but ultimately empty and forgettable.
into music since I was really young, like 5 and stuff. Like my
What are you listening to then, I wonder?
To illustrate his point, one could compare a song like Queen's Good Old-Fashioned Lover Boy, with its playful melody and complex chord changes, to a Green Day anthem like Holiday, which is driven by a few powerful, repetitive punk rock chords. May heard the energy, but he didn't hear the musical genius. His hatred was rooted in his very definition of what makes a song great. For Queen, an album like A Night at the Opera was a showcase of musical diversity. They could leap from blistering hard rock, Death on Two Legs, to a gentle folk song, 39, to an over-the-top operatic fantasy, Bohemian Rhapsody. Green Day's American Idiot, in his opinion, was just one loud, fast punk rock sound, stretched over an entire album. He saw their undeniable energy as a crutch, a substitute for real musical imagination and melodic craftsmanship. The scandal for May was that a new generation was hailing this as a work of genius, while to his finely tuned ears, it was missing the heart of great composition. He could respect their passion, but he could not forgive their failure to write truly beautiful and timeless songs. But for May, even flawed passion was better than music with no passion at all, which he believed was being made in a factory. 6. One Direction.
He said X Factor is a big part of our lives, and you know, even before we were on the X Factor, we were always big fans of it, and we still watch it now. So it's
perhaps the deepest and most fundamental of Brian May's musical hatreds wasn't aimed at a band of snarling rockers or ambitious punks, but at the polished, smiling face of a phenomenon he saw as a cultural tragedy. That phenomenon was the manufactured pop band, and its ultimate expression was One Direction. May's passionate hatred was not necessarily directed at the 5 young men in the group. It was aimed squarely at the cynical, industrial machine that created them. Simon Cowell's television show, The X Factor.
And when you've been that involved in it, and you feel more proud of it.
For Brian May, a man who came from a world where bands formed organically out of friendship and a shared dream, the entire concept was an abomination, a monstrous perversion of the artistic process that was actively damaging music. The scandal in May's eyes was the show itself. He repeatedly and publicly blasted the X Factor, calling it a factory that produced disposable, soulless artists who had no creative input. He called the process cruel and a tragedy for music. One Direction was the system's most successful and therefore most offensive product. Their journey stood in stark, almost insulting contrast to Queen's. Queen had to fight for everything. In their early days, they were poor, living in cramped flats, struggling to get by while they honed their unique sound. They fought their record label for creative control, famously refusing to cut down Bohemian Rhapsody for radio. They earned their success through years of relentless hard work and unwavering belief in their own vision.
Our group wasn't really a big deal. It's not abnormal to take a break after having such a...
In contrast, One Direction was assembled by television producers like a piece of furniture. They were handed songs written by teams of hired hitmakers and styled by marketing experts. They were a product, not a band. May hated what this system was doing to the culture of music. He believed it sold a lie about success, bypassing the essential journey of songwriting, gigging in small, sweaty clubs, and developing a genuine artistic voice. He saw it as a karaoke culture that elevated bland imitation over brilliant creation. The music itself was to him secondary, focus-grouped pop designed for maximum commercial appeal and minimum artistic risk. It lacked the soul, the danger, the personality, and the heart that defined the music he had dedicated his life to. In his crusade against the X Factor and its biggest stars like One Direction, Brian May wasn't just being a grumpy rock legend. He was fighting a passionate battle for the very soul of music, defending the sacred principle that real art must come from the heart of an artist, not from a boardroom on a reality television show. May's passionate defense of his craft reveals a man for whom music is no mere entertainment, but a sacred art form. Did he rightly defend rock's soul, or was he just stuck in the past? Tell us your thoughts below. Like and subscribe for more.